Here's a quick look at this PowerPoint here, this template that can help you get started and make it easier to finish your assignment. Here's the open template, and here you could title it anything you want to title it. This is fine, but put your name and any partner's name that you have in here. Okay, the second slide, I should say, is just an example of a query. Where did tornadoes occur between January 1st, 1950 to December 31st, 1959? This is essentially the decade of the 1950s. So notice here the begin date is 1950-01-01, and the end date is 1959-12-31. And the query is only selecting tornadoes. Wind and hail has been omitted. And we're looking at F0 to F5, so all tornadoes. In the 1950s, the reporting wasn't all that great, so this won't overwhelm things. If you tried to do this same query for the decade between 2000 and 2010, you'd probably run into some trouble. The other thing is, if you want to get the number of tornadoes for each F class, F0, F1, F2, you can click on this, and when you're done with the query, that'll appear in the bottom left-hand corner of the query screen or the data screen. So here's the results of that query, and here's a little statement about where the tornadoes occurred, primarily right in here, but definitely east of the Rocky Mountains. And here are the total tornadoes reported in the 1950s with a total number of deaths of 1,646. Okay. And here's another query. What is the F-class distribution of all tornadoes? And again, this can be readily obtained by just clicking on this Show F scale here. Click that Show button. And the results, F0, F1, F2, F3, F4, and F5. Okay. So lots of little tornadoes, F0 through F2, and not very many big tornadoes. This Excel bar graph can be obtained in the Excel template that is also available, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on to make your life easier. And then here's another statement related to that bar graph. And here's an example of a decade query, how things changed over the decades. How have the number of reported large hail events, hail 2 inches or greater, changed from the decades of the 1950s through the 2000s? Okay. Here I've added a little picture just to jazz it up so it's not so boring looking. And that was true in this first one here, this first query. This picture had really nothing to do with the specific question we were trying to answer, but it was an example, or is an example, of some tornado damage from the 1950s, and just makes the presentation a little bit nicer. So I encourage you to do that, do a web search for tornado images or things like that. And so for this query, these were the results for a bar graph. So the 1950s, 60s, and 80s, 90s, 2000s. It is likely that the reported number has increased primarily because the observational network is better. So this isn't indicative of more actual large hail events, but more are being reported. Okay. So this is a good example of how things should work for you.